Hello, and welcome to my first Top 10 list. Today's Top 10 list is the Top 10 Vampires in Comic Books. For those of you who don't know, in the early days of comics, horror comics were prevalent and there were a lot of vampires around. But thanks to Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent, which claimed that comic books were a bad influence on our nation's youth, the Comics Code was created in 1954, and comic book companies had to censor their content to gain approval. This meant no portrayals of vampires. So from 1954 to 1968, you saw very little vampire action in the pages of comic books. Classics Illustrated did do a version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and there was the occasional one-shot from a company who would dare to take a chance. But from 1954 to 1968, there were very few vampires in comic books. Just a little backstory, and let's begin our countdown. The number 10 vampire in comic books, Sebastian Vassilis. Sebastian Vassilis is the arch-enemy of Carl Vincent, and makes his debut in Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter #1. Sebastian was born in the 1400s and is related to Dracula. The first 6 issues of Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter adapt the novel Last Rites: The Return of Sebastian Vassilis from KRG Publishing, available on Kindle and Indie Planet. The novel is being turned into a major motion picture by Crisp Filmworks and will feature actor Louis Antonio Howard as Sebastian. Sebastian makes our list because he is related to Dracula and is one of the most evil vampires in comic book history. At number 9, the Joker. That's right, the Joker was turned into a vampire by none other than Dracula himself in the 2005 animated feature Batman vs. Dracula. The Joker is also turned into a vampire by Sebastian Vassilis in a proposed crossover between KRG and DC Comics. This hasn't actually happened, but it could in the near future. The Joker has yet to be turned in an actual comic book, so he is low on our list, but makes it due to the fact that the trailer is very interesting and the premise would make a great story for a crossover comic.
Sorry, boys, but I've been your guest here for far too long. I need to take over Gotham again.
The Joker did not realize that he was about to gain more power than he'd ever had before.
Wait till the Bats gets a load of the new me.
At number 8, Cassidy Marks. Cassidy was an average American teenager. She was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio by an abusive father. In 1976, Marks, now 17 years of age, ran away from home. She traveled to London to train with the Royal Shakespeare Company and become an actress. She made it to New York and arrived in Manhattan on Halloween, broke and hungry. In order to make some money for food and further travel, she attempted to get a job as a nightclub dancer, but she didn't last. Finally reaching London, Chassidy's dreams of making it as an actress were dashed when she was turned away at the Academy's door. So Cassidy instead got involved in the newly emerging punk rock scene. Not too much later, she was running a late-night errand for a band called the Knobs when she was attacked by an obese vampire called Farley. She escaped by stabbing him in the eye with a drumstick. She was turned into a vampire after that attack. Cassidy makes this list because of how original the story was when it first appeared. It was canceled after less than 100 issue by Chaos Comics, but should be brought back by another comic book company soon. At number 7, Vicente. Vicente is an elder of a vampire clan in 30 Days of Night, which was adapted into comic book format by IDW Publishing. The Nosferatu were once ruled by a council of elders led by Vicente. When the council decided to make themselves known to the human race, humanity rebelled and persecuted most of their race. After a millennium, only a handful survived, led by Vicente. Vicente makes our list because he is conflicted over what the right decision is for him and his kind. He wants to do what's right, but isn't sure himself what to do. At number 6, Lord Andrew Bennett. Between 1981 and 1983, Lord Bennett graced the pages of House of Mystery from DC Comics. In 1591, after being turned into a vampire himself, Lord Andrew Bennett turned his lover, Mary Seward, into a vampire, and she became corrupted by the power. she took the name Mary, Queen of Blood, and created a group of vampires called the Blood Red Moon, bent on taking over the world. The series followed Bennett into the modern day as he tried to undo his mistake and take down Mary and the Blood Red Moon. He was helped by his two companions, Deborah Dancer, a beautiful young woman who Bennett saved from Mary at Woodstock, and Dmitri Mishkin, a Russian man whom Bennett rescued from Mary and his own mother, turned by Mary, when Mishkin was a child. Lord Bennett makes the list because of his popularity. Originally a backup feature, he soon overtook the book, and the finale was almost book length. The number 5 vampire on our list is Hannibal King. From Tomb of Dracula comes Hannibal. His first appearance was in Tomb of Dracula number 25. Hannibal King was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a private detective making a modest living. King was bitten and killed by the vampire Deacon Frost while on a case in London. Waking up to find himself one of the undead, King is horrified at what he has become and vowed never to consummate the curse by passing it to another. Thus, King subsists on blood purchased or stolen from blood banks. King also prefers not to use his vampiric powers, believing that he gives up a part of himself every time he does so. In spite of his vampirism, King continues to operate as a private detective, but only traveling freely by night. As a vampire, he first battles Dracula, the Lord of Earth's vampires. While searching for Deacon Frost, King eventually meets Blade, the vampire hunter, whose mother had been killed by the same Deacon Frost. Initially distrustful of each other, they nevertheless team up to destroy Frost. In the process, King battles a Blade doppelganger created by Deacon Frost. King and Blade then destroy Deacon Frost himself and part as eternal friends. A different version of Hannibal King was played by Ryan Reynolds in Blade Trinity. The number 4 vampire on our list, Vampirella. Vampirella was ranked 35th in Comic Buyer's Guide's 100 Sexiest Women in Comics list. Vampirella initially appeared in Warren Publishing's black and white horror comics magazines, Vampirella number 1, back in September of '69. That series ran to issue number 112, March of '83. The title was a sister magazine of Warren's horror anthologies, Creepy and Eerie. Like those magazines' respective mascots, Uncle Creepy and Cousin Eerie, Vampirella hosted horror stories, though unlike them, she would also star in her own story, which would headline each issue. After Warren went bankrupt, the character was acquired by Harris Publishing and appeared in stories and varied issues from 1991 to 2007. The character is now featured in comics published by Dynamite Comics. Vampirella was originally presented as an inhabitant of the planet Draculon, a world where a vampiric race lived on blood and where blood flowed in rivers. Draculon orbits twin suns that were causing droughts across the planet, marking certain doom for Vampirella and her race. The race of which Vampirella was born, the Vampiri, were able to transform themselves into bats at will, possessed superhuman physical attributes, sprout wings when required to fly, and drink blood. The story begins with the inhabitants of Draculon dying slowly due to the drying up of its blood. The last few lie dying when a spaceship from Earth crashes on the planet. Vampirella, sent to investigate, is attacked. Retaliating, she discovers that the astronauts have blood in their veins. In order for her race to survive, she manages to pilot the ship back to Earth where her adventure begins. Vampirella becomes a good vampire and devotes her energy to ridding our world of the evil kind. Evil vampires owe their existence to Dracula, who came from Draculon, but was corrupted by chaos. The number 3 vampire on our list is Barnabas Collins. Barnabas ranks at number 3 on our list because he was important in bringing vampires back to the world of comic books. As we discussed earlier, Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocents claimed that comics were a bad influence on our nation's youth, and the Comics Code was created in 1954, and comic book companies had to censor their content to get approval. This meant no portrayals of vampires. Gold Key began publication of a Dark Shadows comic in 1968, and they were the first comic book to portray a vampire in its pages since the Comic Code came into being back in '54. We exclude, of course, Classics Illustrated, which did Dracula. Gold Key simply did not put the approval stamp on its issues. From March 14, 1971 to March 11, 1972, the Newspaper Enterprise Association syndicated a Dark Shadows comic strip by illustrator Kenneth Bruce Bald. Gold Key Comics released 35 issues of the regular Dark Shadows comic book, mostly written by John Warner, which ran for years after the cancellation of the ABC TV series. The comic series ran from 1968 to 1976, and in 1991, Innovation Publishing released a short-lived comic book series based on the NBC TV series. Additionally, Dynamite Entertainment launched a new monthly series of Dark Shadows comic books in October 2011. Actors that have played Barnabas on TV and in movies include Jonathan Frid, Ben Cross, and Johnny Depp. The number 2 vampire on our list is Morbius, the living vampire. As we discussed with Barnabas Collins, vampires were not allowed in comic books under the original rules of the Comics Code. Marvel Comics, however, wanted to launch a line of horror comics, including Dracula. After being turned down initially, Roy Thomas began brainstorming on his own vampire character, and he came up with Morbius. Morbius was allowed to appear in comics because his vampirism derived from science, not supernatural forces. Morbius debuted in Amazing Spider-Man number 101 back in October of '71, a tragic and sympathetic antagonist in his initial 2-issue arc, having acquired his vampiric addiction while researching a cure for his own rare fatal blood disease. Morbius collided again with Spider-Man and others in Marvel Team-Up number 3 through 4, July and September of '72. Morbius went on to star in Vampire Tales, a black and white horror comic magazine published by Marvel's sister company, Curtis Magazines, appearing in all but 2 of the mature audience title's 11 issues, between '73 and '75. Michael Morbius was born in Greece. He was attacked by the Lizard and defeated when Spider-Man and the Lizard joined forces. A flashback reveals that Morbius was a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist who had attempted to cure himself of a rare blood disease with an experimental treatment involving vampire bats and electroshock therapy. However, he instead became inflicted with the worst conditions: pseudo-vampirism that mimicked the powers and bloodthirst of legendary vampirism. Morbius now had to digest blood in order to survive and had a strong aversion to light. The Ultimate Marvel version of Morbius first appeared in Ultimate Spider-Man number 95. Unlike the original character from which he was derived, Ultimate Morbius is a true vampire, the son of Dracula and brother of Vlad III, Dracula himself, with all the powers and abilities associated with the usual interpretation of Dracula. And that leads us to the number 1 vampire in comic books. Did you have any doubt who would be number 1 on our list? Of course, it's Dracula. When Marvel wanted to publish a Dracula comic book, they were thwarted by the Comics Code of the day, which forbade any vampires from appearing. We already discussed how Gold Key got by this with Dark Shadows and how Marvel created their own vampire with Morbius. This paved the way for the Comics Code editors, whoever they may have been, to relax their standards a bit and finally allow vampires with supernatural origins to be used in comic books. Marvel could finally publish their Dracula title. The modern Marvel version of Dracula was created by Jerry Conway and Gene Colan in Tomb of Dracula number 1 from 1972. In Marvel Comics, Dracula appeared in Tomb of Dracula comic book, which ended in 1979. Their Dracula was inspired by the Jack Palance made-for-television film from 1973. Although Dracula and all other vampires were eventually destroyed by the mystical Montesi formula in the pages of Doctor Strange, the Vampire Lord was revived. Marvel published a 4-issue Tomb of Dracula miniseries reuniting Wolfman and Colan under its Epic Comics imprint in 1991. They revived Dracula and his foes in the short-lived Night Stalkers and Blade series in the 1990s. Most recently, Dracula took the title role in the miniseries Dracula, Lord of the Undead. Since Dracula first appeared in Marvel Comics, many other companies have also used the Dark Prince in their issues, since the character is in public domain. He's fought or teamed up with the likes of everyone from Mr. T to Zorro. And that's our top 10 look at the top 10 vampires within the pages of comic books. Let me know what you thought of my top 10 list in the comments section below. And if you agreed with me or disagreed with me, please keep it cordial and no negative stuff. Just be sure to tune in next week. Gonna have another top 10 list for you. I'm Kevin Gibbon. Have a good day.